And we've cut across to these live pictures that you see on your screens of the gala dinner that is being hosted by President Murmu at the Bharat Mandapam. She has just arrived, and this is the dinner meet that is at the end of the day. It has been a successful day one at the G20 summit, and most importantly how India has fared, not just in terms of pulling off a very successful event, but also the big challenge that it lied in front of it when it came to the consensus on the Delhi declaration. That has been achieved, and that too with 100% unanimity, a feat that some were doubtful whether India would be able to pull off. And this indeed, as we see on the first day itself, now it will be followed by dinner. We are also getting you details as the dinner that is being hosted by President Murmu at Bharat Mandapam, and an elaborate menu that of course has been planned. We've been getting you details of it. Apart from the many cuisines, it is also to give a flavor of the Indian food that is been planned for all our guests. More than 300 guests who are expected, and they have been invited. That include former prime ministers and chief ministers as well. 170 guests who are on the list of the G20 special dinner that is being hosted by President Murmu. Remember, as soon as the leaders arrive, first will be a picture, and thereafter it will be followed by dinner, which will also mean talks that will happen over dinner. President Murmu, who is hosting the special dinner on the first day of the G20 summit. And just to take you through the details of who all are invited, it includes former Prime Ministers Manmohan Singh, H.D. Devegowda, who of course had excused himself on health grounds. Also, as we understand, several chief ministers, former prime ministers, cabinet ministers, secretaries in the central government, and distinguished guests who will be a part of this gala dinner that is being held at the multi-function hall of Bharat Mandapam. As all these guests will be welcomed by President Murmu. You see those pictures on your screens. The event that is being hosted by President Murmu, Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar and his wife Sudesh Dhankar, Prime Minister Modi, former President Ramnath Kovind, and former Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu, who will be joining the dinner party. The list of cabinet ministers include Rajnath Singh, Amit Shah, Nitin Gadkari. This, as we say with the pictures on our screens right now, President Murmu and Prime Minister Modi, who are right there on your screens as they are there to welcome their guests. Of course, needless to say, India being the perfect host that it is, playing through the G20 summit to all the world leaders, and most importantly, after the success that has been witnessed on day one, where the consensus has been achieved on the Delhi declaration, which some may have doubted whether India will be able to pull off, especially in the absence of the head of states of China and Russia. But never ever has such unanimity been seen on a consensus document at the G20, which India has been able to pull off this historic feat. And here it is followed by meet and greet, wine and dine to be precise, that is going to happen next. President Murmu is hosting this dinner at the Bharat Mandapam, and there you see on your screens President Murmu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who are there to welcome the guests. Remember, the event's hosts are President Murmu, Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar, his wife Sudesh Dhankar, Prime Minister Modi, former President Ramnath Kovind, and former Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu, who are also joining the dinner party. Union ministers who have also been invited. It includes several chief ministers, Minister of State who have also been invited, CAG and important officials, and that include that of the ministry, also Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla, NSA Ajit Doval, Delhi LG VK Saxena, G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant, and other important officials and distinguished guests who will be a part of this dinner. Former Prime Ministers Dr. Manmohan Singh and H.D. Devegowda were also invited for this dinner. However, H.D. Devegowda had to excuse himself on health grounds. Right now, let's cut across to these pictures and stay with what really is happening at this spot.
दिल्ली में विहंगम दृश्य, भारत की आन शान का प्रतीक, अपने आप में तिरंगे की छटा में लहराती ये रोशनी, दूधिया रोशनी के साथ में भारत की कला और संस्कृति साफ तौर से दिखाई पड़ रही है। यह है विविधता वाला भारत, जहां पे सब कुछ विद्यमान है। भारत की विविधता का तरीके से मुजाहिरा जिस प्रकार से किया गया है, एक मिनी इंडिया साफ तौर से भारत मंडपम में दिखाई पड़ता है। हमें मालूम है कि अपने आप में दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा कन्वेंशन सेंटर के तरीके से इसको स्थापित किया गया है और भारत की विविधता के दर्शन इसमें लगातार होते हैं। और ये नटराज की मूर्ति 27 फीट ऊंची और अपने आप में अष्टधातु के तरीके से बेहद परंपरागत तरीके से बनाई हुई, और ये दूधिया रोशनी में नहाया हुआ तमाम प्रकार की जो तिरंगी रोशनी है तिरंगे से जुड़ी हुई, वो भी अपने आप में दिखाई पड़ रही है। ये बताने जताने के लिए काफी है कि आज का भारत, नया भारत, बदलता भारत, विकसित हो रहा भारत, अमृतकाल का भारत किस प्रकार से तेज गति से आगे बढ़ रहा है। तब जो कि दुनिया के इतने बड़े G20 जैसे मंच के नेताओं को उनकी मेजबानी कर रहा है। भारत के बढ़ते इस कदम को, बढ़ते रसूख को, वैश्विक एक तरीके से उसकी बढ़ती स्वीकारता को दिखाने, बताने और जताने के लिए काफी है कि कैसे भारत मंडपम सजा हुआ है, तैयार है अपने मेहमानों का स्वागत करने के लिए। हम जानते हैं कि भारत के लिहाज से अगर बात की जाए तो निश्चित तौर से मेहमान भगवान के समान होता है, और इस प्रकार की सोच रखने वाला, इस प्रकार की भारतीयता को आत्मसात करने वाली इस विचार को कहीं ना कहीं भारत मंडपम में भी समाहित किया गया है।
बिल्कुल नरेंद्र, ये शाम का दृश्य आप देख सकते हैं, जिस तरह से नटराज की मूर्ति, ये भगवान शिव की नृत्य मुद्रा की ये मूर्ति है। और ये जो जिस तरह का दृश्य जो दिखाई दे रहा है नरेंद्र, सुबह हमने देखा इसी भारत मंडपम में प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी ने और भारत ने G20 की अध्यक्षता के साथ विश्व की तमाम उन चुनौतियों के नए समाधान रखे, जिसमें आने वाले समय में किस तरह से आर्थिक मोर्चे पे कर्ज में दबे या फिर उस संकट से जूझ रहे देशों के लिए एक बड़ा समाधान दिया गया है इकोनॉमिक कॉरिडोर के तौर पर। साथ ही साथ आने वाली समय के लिए स्वच्छ ऊर्जा की तरफ भी एक बड़ा कदम उठाया गया है। तो एक तरफ भारत का वो रूप था जब आर्थिक मोर्चे पर बड़े कुछ कदम भारत ने अपने नेतृत्व में उठाए, तो दूसरी तरफ ये है जो भारत की सांस्कृतिक ताकत, भारत की सनातन परंपरा को दर्शा रहा है।
बिल्कुल, आपने सनातन परंपरा का जिक्र किया तो अपने आप में ये कहना गलत नहीं होगा किस प्रकार से योग का प्रदर्शन भी इस भारत मंडपम में दिखाई पड़ता है, किस प्रकार से समय के घूमते हुए चक्र का परिवर्तन के साथ प्रकृति के समन्वय का समय चक्र भी वहां दिखाई पड़ता है। और ये कहना भी गलत नहीं होगा कि भारत की जो सदियों पुरानी जो विविधता है उसको वहां समाहित किया गया है। भारत ही नहीं बल्कि भारतीयता का जो विचार है, भारतीयता वो भारतीयता जो वसुधैव कुटुंबकम की बात करती है, वो भारतीयता जो कहती है कि मेहमान भगवान समान होता है, वो भारतीयता जो पूरे विश्व को एक परिवार के तरीके से मानती है, वो सब कुछ समाहित है दुनिया के सबसे बड़े कन्वेंशन सेंटर के तरीके से भारत मंडपम में। और निश्चित तौर से तमाम जिस बात का ऋतु आप जिक्र कर रही हैं, हार्डकोर डिप्लोमेसी, नेगोशिएशंस, ये सारी बातें ठीक है, लेकिन इस वक्त जिस तरीके से भारत मंडपम अपने आप में रोशनी में नहाया हुआ है, तिरंगी रोशनी में नहाया हुआ, तिरंगे के सराबोर नजर आ रहा है, ये अपने आप में बताने के लिए दुनिया को काफी है कि कैसे भारत भारतीयता के साथ में तैयार है दुनिया के साथ कदम ताल आगे करने के लिए। और आज दुनिया भी भारत के साथ आगे बढ़कर हाथ मिलाने को नजर आ रही है। और ये हमने तमाम आज शुरू हुए अलायंस या कहा जाए इनिशिएटिव्स के माध्यम से भी देखा, जहां पे दुनिया की सबसे बड़ी बड़ी ताकतें आज भारत के साथ हाथ मिला रही हैं, आगे बढ़ रही हैं। ऋतु
जी हाँ, बिल्कुल, अतिथि देवो भव की भावना के साथ भारत, प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी, राष्ट्रपति द्रौपदी मुर्मू तैयार हैं। रात्रि भोज के आयोजन के बाद अब थोड़े ही देर में इस स्थल पर लगातार मेहमानों का आना शुरू होगा और विदेशी मेहमानों के साथ ही साथ राजनेताओं को भी आमंत्रित किया गया है आज के रात्रि भोज के आयोजन के लिए।
बिल्कुल, और अपने आप में जब मेहमान आएंगे तो वो सीधी तस्वीरें हम आप तक दिखाएंगे, क्योंकि भारत अगर मेजबानी कर रहा है G20 की अध्यक्षता के माध्यम से, तो दूरदर्शन भी मेजबानी कर रहा है हर एक तस्वीर को लेकर। और दूरदर्शन नेटवर्क के माध्यम से हर तस्वीर सबसे पहले आप तक सटीक तरीके से पहुंचाने की जिम्मेदारी हमने होस्ट ब्रॉडकास्टर के तरीके से निभाने का तय किया था, और वो हम बखूबी निभा भी रहे हैं।
जी हाँ, बिल्कुल। और G20 शिखर सम्मेलन के दौरान आज प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी ने वैश्विक बुनियादी ढांचे और निवेश के लिए साझेदारी कार्यक्रम में भारत मध्य पूर्व यूरोप आर्थिक कॉरिडोर को लॉन्च किया। इस मौके पर पीएम मोदी ने इस समझौते को ऐतिहासिक बताया।
हम सब ने एक महत्वपूर्ण और ऐतिहासिक समझौता
And yes, the mesmerizing colors that you see on the Bharat Mandapam shining not just from the Bharat Mandapam but even towards it is an absolutely splendid sight if you witness it in person. Delhi is lit, Delhi is shining, and most importantly the jewel on the crown is Bharat Mandapam. At this point you see how beautifully the lights that have just created this whole magical atmosphere right around Bharat Mandapam, and at it this is to welcome our guests, this is to tell them that India is the perfect host, this is to give them that special experience that they have not just been experiencing right from the word go when they arrived at the Palam airport, but even this morning when they were welcomed by Prime Minister Modi, followed by the very important developments that took place through the day, and the purpose of the G20 summit with India's presidency really meeting its finality with the consensus that has been attained on the Delhi Declaration. But now is the time for celebration, now is the time to meet and greet, now is the time for conversations and talk over the very special experience that the government is providing to all the guests who and the world leaders and the heads of delegation who are right here for this gala dinner that is being hosted by President Droupadi Murmu. Just a short while ago we also showed All right, so there you see the handshake, the welcome, and most importantly, Prime Minister Modi really showing our guests when it comes to the heritage and the civilization and giving them a first-hand experience of the Indian culture. Prime Minister Modi interacting with the world leaders who have already begun arriving at the Bharat Mandapam for the gala dinner that is hosted by President Droupadi Murmu. This absolutely lit Bharat Mandapam, and the very many colors that you see where like I said, it is like a jewel on the crown right now. That is exactly how Bharat Mandapam looks, and all the world leaders who are our guests being welcomed by Prime Minister Modi and President Murmu.
है कि किस तरीके से तमाम लोग इस वक्त पहुंचे हुए हैं। प्रधानमंत्री मोदी और उसके साथ साथ राष्ट्रपति द्रौपदी मुर्मू स्वागत करते हुए तमाम लोगों का, जो लोग इस वक्त वहां पे मेहमान पहुंच रहे हैं। और भारत मंडपम अपने आप में पूरी तरीके से तैयार है मेहमानों के स्वागत के लिए, और ये स्वागत सत्कार भारत की एक परंपरा का बड़ा हिस्सा है, और ये भी अपने आप में दिखाता है किस तरीके से लगातार भारत इस बात से अपनी विविधता का मुजाहिरा भी करता है।
इंटरनेशनल मॉनेटरी फंड की मैनेजिंग डायरेक्टर मिस्टर लीना जॉर्जिवा यहाँ पर पहुंच चुकी हैं, उनका भी स्वागत किया।
और जीवा जो कि IMF की मैनेजिंग डायरेक्टर हैं, वो पहुंची थी, वो स्वागत से अभिभूत नजर आई थी, और भारतीयता का जो एक तरीके से प्रदर्शनी वहां पे थी उससे वो अभिभूत थी, और उसके साथ खुद को जोड़ने से वो रोक नहीं पाई थी ऋतु, और वो अपने आप में एक बेहद खूबसूरत सी तस्वीरें थी। और निश्चित तौर से ये रोशनी इस बात को इशारा करती है कि भारत न सिर्फ खुद को रोशन कर रहा है बल्कि दुनिया को रोशन करने के लिए तैयार और तत्पर नजर आ रहा है। बढ़ती हुई ये रोशनी, सतरंगी रोशनी, सबको समाहित करने का संकेत और संदेश भी देती है कि किस तरीके
नटराज cosmic in fact in its design, and has been studied also for under various themes to understand the deeper significance of the cosmic messages that are portrayed through them, through the dance of Nataraj or Shiva.
Indeed, and in some ways, this is the first time the world is seeing the Bharat Mandapam in all its glory after dusk. with all the lights on, and we can see the visuals of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres meet the President and the Prime Minister before the gala dinner.
He must be very happy that, the focus of the G20's document seems to be on the SDGs very clearly right from the start, 2030 goals. And of course, they are UN administered goals, and so he should be happy that they found so much focus.
Indeed. And the UN, by the way, is also in the thick of action to negotiate a grain deal between Russia and Ukraine. It's mediated in the past, but the talks are still ongoing as we speak. All parties concerned are hopeful of a breakthrough sometime in the near future. Right, so we've seen so far 5 leaders arrive for the gala dinner. The leaders of the ADB, FSB, International Labour Organization, the IMF and the UN. We are now waiting for the president of the World Bank, Mr. Ajay Banga, to arrive for the gala dinner at Bharat Mandapam, the venue of the 18th G20 summit here in New Delhi.
This is Dr. Tedros from the WHO who has arrived.
Right, so you're seeing the World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, meeting and greeting the President and Prime Minister. Remember, under their stewardship, the Institute of Traditional Medicine has been set up in the Western Indian state of Gujarat, and that's been in the news for some time now. The Institute of Traditional Medicine under the auspices of the World Health Organization here in India.
Indeed, and it was also very visible during the time when COVID, the pandemic, constantly announcing different measures that should have been taken, and very much helped in the world meeting or getting past that particular deadly pandemic.
And now we have the Secretary General of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, Mr. Matthias Cormann, meeting and greeting the President and Prime Minister at the gala dinner reception.
I think it served in the Australian cabinet at some time.
Right, so if you're just tuning in, viewers, it is 16 minutes past 7 p.m. New Delhi time, and you're watching the continuing coverage here on DD India of the gala dinner, which is about to begin at the Bharat Mandapam, which you can see on your screens right now, the brand new state-of-the-art convention center here in New Delhi.
And there's Mr. Ajay Banga, who's probably a homecoming of sorts, isn't it? Because he studied in Delhi.
Indeed.
And also, well, I suppose this is a homecoming. Who wouldn't want to come back?
So there you see the President of World Bank, Mr. Ajay Banga, and his spouse meeting and greeting President Murmu and Prime Minister Modi at the gala dinner reception here at Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. Mr. Banga is a prominent Indian American who has held a number of key positions in the past, including at MasterCard, and is today the President of the World Bank. There you see Mr. Banga and his spouse at the gala dinner.
And he's been crucial in these decisions of making the multilateral banks a little stronger by voicing the opinions also of the Global South.
And we're getting these visuals, majestic lawns of the Bharat Mandapam lighted up in the New Delhi evenings. Next up is the President of Egypt, General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Egypt is a special invitee to this year's G20 summit hosted by India. There you see General el-Sisi with President Droupadi Murmu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Remember, India has invited 8 countries as special guests for the G20 summit, including Egypt and a number of other countries from South Asia and beyond.
Prime Minister had recently visited, soon after going to the US, had gone to Egypt as well.
And if our viewers are curious about which are those 8 countries, there's Oman, Bangladesh, Egypt, Mauritius, Netherlands, Nigeria, Singapore, and the UAE. 8 countries invited specially by India as a host of the G20 summit to New Delhi. The Nataraj statue standing tall outside the Bharat Mandapam, a majestic sight for many. It symbolizes the best of Indian culture, heritage, built specially for the Bharat Mandapam.
And also some details about the backdrop behind Prime Minister Narendra Modi. This is the Nalanda Mahavihara, and it was in operation between the 5th century and the 12th century. Its legacy goes back to Buddha's and Mahavira's era, reflecting ancient India's advancement towards, disseminating knowledge, wisdom, things that are so sacred to our country. And its embrace also of diversity, meritocracy, freedom of thought, collective governance, autonomy, knowledge sharing for all. They all align, in fact, with the core principles of what India stands for. Reputed as one of the earliest international universities in the world, Nalanda is a living testament to the enduring spirit of advancement, of educational goals, the commitment to build a harmonious world community, and all that aligns with India's G20 presidency pretty well, the theme of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
Indeed, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, Sanskrit for the world is one family. We just saw the Director General of the World Trade Organization meet the Indian dignitaries. We have another guest arriving at the venue of the gala dinner hosted by President Murmu at the Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. So New Delhi wears a festive look on day 1 of the G20 summit here in the city. All decked up for the mega event being hosted at the state-of-the-art modern facility and convention center in the heart of the Indian capital, the Bharat Mandapam, resplendent in all its glory this evening here in New Delhi.
This is the
Next up is the Prime Minister of Mauritius, indeed Pravind Jugnauth, the Prime Minister of Mauritius, and his spouse meeting President Murmu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Of course, so they have great civilizational links with India, and he speaks Hindi as well, right?
Indeed, and Mauritius has a sizable population of people of Indian origin, Mark, and it is one of India's key partners in the wider Indian Ocean as well. Civilizational ties, centuries-old ties between the peoples of India and Mauritius, where a large number of people speak Hindi, they understand Hindi, they speak Bhojpuri, another dialect, and they have close ties with their kin back home as well. have the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, and his spouse meeting Prime Minister Modi and President Droupadi Murmu.
The Netherlands, too, are a special invitee to the G20 this year under India's presidency.
Indeed, as you mentioned correctly, Mark, Netherlands is one of 8 countries invited specially by India to this year's G20 summit. Every host country has a privilege of inviting some countries as its special guest outside of the G20 family. And this year, as I mentioned before, Mark, India choosing to invite 8 countries: Oman, Bangladesh, Egypt, Mauritius, the Netherlands, Nigeria, Singapore, and the UAE.
And Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has arrived. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina from Bangladesh, India's close neighbor, and a close friend also of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. They get along very well. And indeed, the relationship between India and Bangladesh has only blossomed and grown. And in fact, Bangladesh over the last few years has emerged stronger as an economy as well. And trading with India, of course, surrounded largely by India. So it has, of course, seaports which are now being utilized by India's northeast as well.
Mark, so we've seen a mix of leaders of international organizations and special invitees making their way to Bharat Mandapam for a gala dinner to be hosted by President Droupadi Murmu.
Member countries are probably next.
Indeed.
Now this, I think, is the president of
Nigeria,
the
Mr.
first,
Bola Ahmed
right.
Tinubu.
Like he was the first person to arrive for the summit.
Indeed. And Nigeria is one of 8 countries invited specially, as I said, Mark, for this year's G20 summit by India.
Indeed, and Nigeria being also the largest economy in Africa, and they must be very privileged or pleased to, that the African Union has become a member of the G20. They themselves are hoping to become a member in their own right after, in South Africa as a member. So why not Nigeria?
Why not? Indeed. As you correctly mentioned, Mark, one of the big outcomes of this year's G20 summit is the inclusion or the addition of the 55-member African Union as a G20 member.
Prime Minister of Singapore has arrived. The Prime Minister of Singapore.
Indeed, Lee Hsien Loong, the Prime Minister of Singapore, with the President and Prime Minister of India. As you mentioned, Mark, just moments ago, the leaders looking back at the picture behind them of Nalanda, which is an ancient center of learning in India, and which still resonates with a large, sizable population. Especially
from the ASEAN, isn't it? And Singapore, a large, a major component of the ASEAN, one of the strong economies of ASEAN. In fact, ASEAN as a grouping itself is also quite, has a claim to be a member of the G20. If one would ask, one could argue clearly that, this is a sizable grouping on its own, has economic potential.
Next, we have the Foreign Minister of the UAE with President Murmu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the gala dinner. Remember, the UAE delegation is being led by President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Foreign Minister standing in for the leader at the gala dinner.